This is an I Am Listening original podcast.
We do need more young people in politics to not just bring energy, but to bring and address some of the issues facing younger people, not in KCC's remit, but for example, home ownership. Young people can't afford their homes, and we need people banging the drums on these issues that are impacting our younger people in society.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast, your go-to source for insightful discussions on local and national political matters. Join us as we take a deep dive into local government across the county. Find out what the key decision makers have to say, what your money is being spent on, and how the party's policies could affect how we live. Plus, don't miss our regular feature, Westminster Watch, where we dissect the latest developments and decisions shaping the political landscape in the heart of the UK's capital. Engage with us as we delve into the issues that matter to you and explore the dynamic world of politics from a Kent perspective.
Welcome to this edition of Kent Politics Podcast. In the week, Medway Council got serious about childhood obesity. A former Tory councillor has joined Reform, and we look at Labour's first 100 days in government. My name is Simon Finlay, local democracy reporter covering Kent County Council, and I'm joined by Robert Boddy, who looks after Medway Council.
Hello.
Daniel Essen, who covers district and borough councils.
Hello.
And senior news editor Nikki White, who will be looking at what's happening at Westminster.
Hello.
Later on, we'll be joined by our special guest, Maidstone Councillor Stanley Forecast, to talk about his party's defeat in the election and his aspirations to become an MP in 2029. First up, Robert, what's been happening in Medway?
Well, councillors have been considering Medway Council's 5-year plan on curbing childhood obesity, but I wanted to take a look at previous efforts to reduce those rates of obese and overweight children in primary schools and how successful they've been.
What did you find then?
Well, in 2014, Medway Council decided to put in new rules which meant takeaways within 400 metres of a school can't open during lunchtime or immediately after the school day finishes, in an attempt to prevent kids from eating these unhealthy foods. However, the rates of children who are obese or overweight have only gone up. In 2013-14, 21.9% of reception children and 32.8% of Year 6 children were overweight or obese in Medway. 10 years later, it's become 22.3% of reception children and 37.4% of Year 6 children. That's about 1% higher than the England average in each category.
So this scheme's been a bit of a failure, really, hasn't it?
Yes and no. I mean, both councillors involved with the scheme at the time and GP Dr. Julian Spink say it's been worthwhile, even if it hasn't made a huge difference, because public health is a problem which requires lots of little actions which build up to make a bigger difference. They did say more needs to be done to educate children and their parents about cooking more and cooking healthier meals, because it's the ease of ready meals and takeaways, which are ultra-processed foods, which is behind this rise in obesity. A lot of people, we've had these discussions, what can a council do? And education is sort of the main thing that these experts are pushing on. I mean, I personally, just as a slight tangent, I remember when I was in Year 7, I've still got, in fact, my cookbook with recipes put forward lovingly by Ed Balls and Gordon Brown, which I received on my first day of secondary school.
And can you remember any of the recipes?
I definitely remember tomato soup was in there, and I think maybe a cheese sandwich. It wasn't the top, Michelin guide will not be troubling my school.
Something with the word red in it, perhaps. Dan, what have you been looking at?
So listeners might not know that Kent now has its first Reform UK councillor, so I've been chatting to him about how the party's doing locally.
Oh, do tell. Who is it and where is it?
So it's David Wimble, who's a long-time member for New Romney on Folkestone Hive District Council. He used to be a Tory, then he was an independent, but still serving in the Tory administration. Under the previous, when they were in control of the council a couple of years ago, but recently decided to join Reform. I know you've covered the fact that Reform people have been trying to induce lots of Tories at County Hall over to their side and that sort of thing, but Councillor Wimble tells me that that's not been the case with him, and he has apparently known Nigel Farage for quite a while, has always been right of centre, and thinks that basically now's the best time for a third party challenger, so he decided to join up.
Is he the lone Reform member in the whole district?
He's the Lone Reform councillor, he's not the Lone Reform member. So Reform is legally a company owned mostly by Nigel Farage, but at their annual conference this year he announced that would end and that the party would be developing proper internal democratic structures like other parties have. In part due to this, there's been a proliferation of local Reform Party branches, and in Folkestone Hive district there's quite an active one, or at least so I hear, with a couple of hundred members already. Apparently its meeting sizes dwarf those of the local Tory association, but I'm not sure how much of an achievement that really is.
Right, and what does Councillor Wimble make of Reform's prospects around here then?
So unsurprisingly, he said that for bruised Tories in Kent, there's quite an allure to joining Reform. He tells me that there's a couple of Tory councillors in North Kent who are expected to defect to Reform pretty imminently. More surprisingly, he told me he reckons the Reform could outright take control of Kent County Council in the elections in May with a clean majority of the 81 seats. I mean, personally, to me, that seems kind of like the zeal that only a convert can have. I'd be surprised if they could win an outright majority. But if there are more, major immigration-related scandals, or the government is, still in the doldrums in 6 months from now, I think Reform could be a pretty serious thorn in their side.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. Reform will be, I think, probably a decider in many, many seats, both Conservative and Labour.
So what's happening at County Hall, Simon?
Well, actually, what I did in the last few days is go down to Folkestone to garner some opinions from people after 100 days of the new Labour administration. I went there to do a multimedia piece with Gabriel Morris, and we ended up speaking to quite a few people just to see what they were saying. And don't forget, this was a constituency that had previously been held by a Conservative MP since the last war. We had Harry Mackison, Albert Costain, Michael Howard, now Lord Howard, and most recently Damien Collins. And Damien Collins enjoyed a majority of more than 20,000 after the 2019 election, but watched that being overturned by Labour's bright young thing, Tony Vaughan, with a majority of nearly 4,000.
So how have the people of Folkestone taken to their new Labour government?
Now, I have to make this clear. We weren't conducting a poll. It was just a little snapshot of a few individuals that we spoke to. But it has to be said, apart from one or two people who are prepared to give the new government the benefit of the doubt, most were pretty negative. Nearly everyone mentioned the winter fuel allowances being stopped and the freebies and gifts being enjoyed by Labour's top table, sometimes conflating the two, which is something Labour feels is wrong. But one person said that the whole thing looks pretty terrible, but most made the point that there doesn't seem to be a plan. That was the thing that people were saying, that there doesn't seem to be a plan. People are unsure about where they stand on small business, utilities, the NHS, adult social care, social housing and homelessness.
Isn't this normal, though, for a new government, to be fair?
Well, it is, yeah. But every government has a short honeymoon period, but never as short as this one. Sir Keir Starmer's personal ratings are in freefall, but one pollster seems to suggest that if another election was held tomorrow, the Tories would lose even more seats than they did in July, and Labour would gain some.
So, in your view, why did Folkestone go to Labour?
I think it's lots of reasons. I mean, if you look at the local council, it's been yo-yoing all over the place for 2.5 decades. Tory, then Lib Dem, then Tory, and these days it's the Green Party. But the Westminster seat has always been Tory. It's been Tory for generations. And what may have happened that over the years, that once the regeneration through arts and culture kind of kicked in, there's been a change in the sort of demography of Folkestone, and particularly over the last decade, that left-leaning types have been moving there. Perhaps an influx of Londoners has partly caused that. It could have been the unpopularity of the Conservatives or the MP, Damien Collins himself. He certainly hasn't attracted many negative headlines personally, even if the Tories have attracted loads. But the fact that Mr Collins was nearly pipped into third place by Reform UK tells you everything, as it did in many of the seats that the Tories lost at the last election. The question is whether the Tories can win it back, and possibly, but the latest polling would suggest that Reform would move into second place in 2029, and the Tories would move into third. A local candidate might help them this time, and it may hinge on who the party chooses for its leader, but we'll find that out by early November. Nikki, what's caught your eye from the national scene?
So the big news coming out of Westminster this week for the people of Kent is that, well, there's no news, or at least no news on the Lower Thames crossing. The idea to build a tunnel under the River Thames near Gravesend first came to light back in 2009, but £300 million later, and we still haven't got a decision on whether it's going to go ahead or not. All that money has gone into whittling things down from 5 suggested routes to just one. So a tunnel east of Gravesend was officially confirmed as the preferred option in April 2017. And now we're getting down into the nitty-gritty of what that all means. Preparing the planning application has involved various land tests taking place, along with lots of consultations with both the public and other interested parties. And that's resulted in thousands of pages of documents being produced by various government departments, much to the delight of journalists who have to wade through them all to get an update. So it's made it one of the biggest planning projects in British planning history. And in that time, the cost, should it actually go ahead, has spiralled from £5 billion to £9 billion.
As it always does.
As it always does. And as you can imagine, it's left a lot of people who either live or work along the proposed route in some limbo. It had been hoped we'd finally get a yes or a no on Monday, but then Transport Secretary Louise Haigh issued a written statement to Parliament saying it was necessary to push back the decision to May next year. And that's to give everyone more time to consider the application, and that includes any decisions made as part of a spending review. So those in favour of the Lower Thames crossing point to the almost daily problems at Dartford, where drivers are often stuck in queues, and then the town centre gets gridlocked as motorists try to find alternative routes, as we all do. The backers say that the new tunnel, which would be near Gravesend, would double road capacity and give a £40 billion economic boost to that region, especially with freight coming to and from the port of Dover. Then you've got those who are against it, and they're saying that simply all you're doing is moving the problem from Dartford to Gravesend, and they reckon that in 5 years anyway, both crossings will be just as busy as Dartford is today. Should it get permission, National Highways wants to start construction in 2026, but even then the road isn't going to be ready until 2032.
So I know there's now a couple Labour MPs up in that neck of the woods. What do they think about it?
Well, Dartford MP Jim Dixon has made it one of his top priorities at the moment, and he wants to get it pushed through, as you might expect. And he even took Roads Minister Lillian Greenwood to the crossing a few weeks ago so that she could see the problems herself and see what the traffic is like. On the other side, you've got Gravesham MP Dr Lauren Sullivan, who, as you might expect, is against it. She's worried about the environmental impact, noise and the health concerns for those who will find themselves living closest to the tunnel, as well as the wider impact on traffic. So you'll have drivers who are trying to cut through from the M20, and they'll be going through villages such as Mepham, Vigo and Icestead-Rise, which will cause other problems. But the pair of them are now sharing an office at Westminster, so Jim and Lauren will no doubt have much to talk about over the next 7 months.
Is there anything else going on this week?
Well, another thing that isn't happening for Kent won't be home to the next Tory party leader after Tunbridge MP Tom Tugendhat was eliminated from the Conservative leadership contest in the third round. That was on Tuesday. He was one of 4 contenders hoping to replace Rishi Sunak, and said he wanted to bring back honesty and integrity to British politics. That didn't find favour with enough of his colleagues, though, and they weren't swayed by what he'd promoted as Tugend stats, such as the fact that he appealed to more undecided voters than any of his rivals, and he was the most popular candidate amongst Reform, SNP and Lib Dem voters. In a tweet, Tom thanked everyone who backed his campaign for their energy ideas and for showing a vision of what the party could become.
Is there a topic that you would like to be discussed on the Kent Politics podcast? Perhaps you've got a question for one of our panel, or you'd like to comment on a hot topic in local or national government. Get in touch by emailing or sending a voice note to kentpoliticspodcast@thekmgroup.co.uk.
3 years ago, when Stanley Forecast was elected as Conservative councillor for Maidstone Palace Wood, he was 20 years old, one of the youngest, if not the youngest, councillor in Kent. He now works for the Conservative MP Helen Grant and has set his sights on Westminster for himself in 2029. Hi Stan, how are you doing?
Hi Simon, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
No problem at all. First, just give us an idea of how you got into politics then.
Of course, essentially, for as long as I can remember, I've had a sort of deep love and passion for the country. And as I was going through secondary school during the Theresa May years, we had the referendum, which you'll know well, and other issues impacting the country. And it was sort of then when I put together that politics and, Britain and how government can sort of drive the direction of the country.
So what attracted you to the Conservatives and not the Liberal Democrats or the Labour Party or the Greens?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I suspect I had sort of centre-right views since I was probably before a teenager, to be honest with you. The reason I'm a Conservative and remain one, even through this hard time for the party, are, values like personal responsibility, freedom, aspiration, opportunity, and a smaller state.
Okay. When you were first elected back in 2021, you weren't really expected to win. What was your strategy to take that particular ward in the Borough Council elections? I stood in Allington initially and won before the boundary changes this year. It hadn't been represented by a Conservative locally for sort of 20, 30 years, and my feeling towards it was, it'd be a good experience and good on the CV and sort of prepare me for the next borough election.
It just so happened in 2021 we had sort of positive national polling with the Boris bounce and the vaccine rollout, and we worked hard on the ground, locally, and it just so happened that I did win.
Yeah. Was it because of the amount of house building in that area, which is just seeing a complete explosion? Do you think that maybe sort of had something to do with it?
Yeah, I mean, I stood on a ticket to fight over development, which is the number one issue for my residents, and I've stayed true to that promise and that effort ever since. So I think that local message probably played a powerful point. I think, people appreciated a younger face, and I looked even younger than 20 at the time. And like I said, I think the national polling did play its role, just as it had or has for many councillors across the country in 2024.
Being an assistant to Helen Grant, who only just scraped in as an MP back in July in the general election, you'll have seen at close quarters the collapse of the Tory vote at a national level in Kent. What was that experience like?
It was tough, really, because you see a party that you're a member of and you believe in its values, and you see things you see things fall apart around you, and you see good colleagues on the council, and Helen would say the same, parliamentary colleagues know that they're probably going to lose. I'm of the opinion that the country always comes first rather than the party, and the country spoke in July just as it did locally in May. To Helen's credit, and I took the same sort of philosophy with my own borough election this year, that we understood the challenges, we understood voters' frustration with the party, and we started campaigning early and tried to hold on to our seats, which we both did.
Did you have any doubt that Mrs. Grant would be re-elected?
I started to get again. I don't think you can underestimate the national polling, and I think Helen's effort over the year before and being on sort of campaign footing far sooner than many other MPs, I suspect, I think played an important role. When the stuff with the D-Day and the betting scandal all sort of come about, the week or two before the election, I become to be nervous. But, like I said, we worked hard, and if there's anything I believe in this life is if you work hard, you will reap your reward.
There was a strong Liberal Democrat challenge from David Nagy, but in the end, he probably may have even split the left of centre vote, because she didn't win by very much in the end. It was over 1,500 votes or something like that. The Labour candidate did very well, and Dave Nagy got I think was it 6,000 votes or whatever he got, probably robbed the Labour Party of that, as did the sort of the Reform UK vote being part of a problem on your side, I guess.
I think that analysis is something that people in Maidstone agree with, and as you alluded to, in the country, Reform took a lot of votes from the Conservatives. We have to be careful not to think, you have to be careful not to be arrogant, and the Conservatives think that they have an absolute right to every centre-right or right-wing voter. And I think, the same sort of message applies on the left. You have to go and win votes, and it made Malling Helen won the most.
Okay. When you look at the general election result overall, what went wrong? What was the reason for what went wrong?
I think first and foremost there was fatigue. Obviously the Conservatives had been in power, or we'd been in power for 14 years, and I think naturally that represents the end of a life cycle, and that's why nobody's won 5 general elections in a row. In a nutshell, tax and immigration were too high, and they were the two key factors which cost us the general election. And then there's a whole other host of other factors. Obviously, Westminster had become a bit like a soap opera from the outside, obviously with Partygate and issues like that. And I think the mini budget was particularly disastrous for us and our reputation for economic credibility.
By the time Rishi Sunak had taken over as PM, do you think it was already done by then?
Yeah, I do. I think it was probably done the moment Boris didn't own up and really apologise for Partygate, but I think after the mini budget, any sort of hope we might have had was done.
I mean, obviously the elephant in the room is Reform UK, particularly strong in Kent. I mean, they polled 14.7% and got 5 seats. The Liberal Democrats polled 12.6% and got 72 seats. So there's obviously the first past the post system is very not always very clear as to how many elected representatives you get compared to the vote you get. But I mean, having said that, that's the system that we work with. But Reform UK is setting its sights on Kent, where they were very, very strong. They averaged, I think, across all the constituencies, I think more than 20% on average, which is much higher than what the national average would be. What sort of a threat do you see them becoming in the next year, before the county council elections, before the next council elections, and ultimately before the next general election?
So, I think the rise of reform is largely been because the Conservatives have, stopped being conservative, really. And I think a lot of their policies are things that, they expect the Parliamentary Conservative Party to put forward. Personally, and I know a lot of colleagues within the party agree, we'd like to see income tax start at 20,000 rather than 12,500. So I think without addressing the true reasons why people have left us for reform, they're going to be tough on immigration, they're going to be tough on taxation, they're going to be tough on welfare, they're going to boost law and order. Without addressing the reasons why, then there's absolutely no reason why they won't continue to grow.
The first big test in Kent will be the election to Kent County Council next year. Are you intending to stand?
I am, yes. Obviously, there'll be a selection process, as I imagine all parties have, but I'm hoping to stand, and I'm hoping to stand in Maidstone Central, where my borough seat is covered.
A lot of KCC Tories are standing down, retiring, or just not going to do it again, as many as maybe 25 plus. Is that going to be a problem?
Well, I think when experienced colleagues, and I know some of them, Simon Webb, for example, and Paul Cooper, when people like that stand down, you lose experience, which obviously has its own implications. I think electorally it could be problematic because, and as Helen and I demonstrated, when you're not necessarily polling nationally, you sort of become reliant on your incumbency and the work you've done and the relationships you've built. So I think in some divisions, it will be tough and make things tougher for the new candidate. But, this is politics, and people don't want to stay around forever.
And you're going to be standing for KCC in the place that you're already standing at the borough, so you have a certain profile.
Yeah, I mean that's partly why I want to do it. Maidstone Central, I have a lot of connections with, be it where I went to school, where I lived, and where I now represent. So if I am selected, which I hope I will be, then yeah.
What's the realistic chance of the Tories retaining a workable majority at KCC, do you think? I
think we will. Is it 60 now or low 60s?
Well, it's 59 out of 81. It was 61 to begin with, but they lost a couple along the way.
Yeah. So that's a huge majority, and I don't think we've lost all our voters. Obviously, the rebuilding process that's happening now with the new leader will play an important role, I suspect, but I don't think it's a lost cause. And I think, we're seeing the troubles that Labour have got into with the government and the problems they're facing. And so I think that will be in people's minds when they vote locally as well. I've always believed, and I keep the belief, people want to vote for a conservative centre-right party. And I think nationally and locally, if we can give messages that align with those values, we will win elections.
There is a perception that many of the members, with the exception of a small few, is that the council chamber at Sessions House is, in the words of one female member of Kent County Council, stale, pale and male. Do you think that helps you come along, as a younger person, to inject some sort of vigour and vitality into the chamber?
Yeah, I mean, there's a natural energy and keenness to get things done, and like I said, experience also has its values. So I think you need a good cross section of ages and a good balance. I think voters appreciate a younger face, providing they do the work, and I like to think I've got that appreciation from my voters in Palace Wood. So we do need more young people in politics to not just bring energy, but to bring and address some of the issues facing younger people, not in KCC's remit, but for example, home ownership. Young people can't afford their homes, and we need people banging the drums on these issues that are impacting our younger people in society.
Yeah. Do you think that local politics generally accurately reflects the makeup of Kent as it is today?
Probably not. Even during my small time on Maidstone Borough Council over the last 3 years, we've seen some changes, and there are younger people, and particularly in our Conservative Association here in Maidstone and Malling, we have a lot of young people interested, which is good. But, broadly, I think local government and indeed Parliament, there is a feeling that it's largely, older white men. And that does need to change, but I don't think it should change so we hit some sort of quota or metric. I think we need to encourage people into politics, and that they get elected and selected for seats based on their own merit.
Do you have aspirations to be an MP? I think you do. And is that your long-term goal?
Yeah, I mean, most people who are close to me know that standing in Parliament and fighting for the country I love would be my biggest dream. Currently, obviously, I'm still a young guy, and I'm very focused on my work and my career and serving on Maidstone Borough Council. But absolutely, Parliament would be in my sort of 5 to 10 year plan.
So do you think you'd be looking for a seat somewhere in Kent in 2029?
Yeah, I mean, if the ball comes from the scrum and the opportunity presents itself, I would go for things. A week's a long time in politics, as you know, Simon, and a lot can change between now and 2029. But if an opportunity presents itself, I would certainly go for it.
Well, where would you fancy, leaving aside Maidstone and Malling?
Yeah, I mean, Kent would be a natural fit. Obviously, born and bred here. Went to the University of Kent, understand the challenges facing us as a South East constituency. But I'm not gonna say it's Kent or nothing. Like I said, I want it to be an appropriate place. I want to align with the voters in an area, and I'll make a decision based on what presents itself. Okay,
Cllr Stanley Forecast, thank you very much indeed for your time today, and I hope we'll speak to you shortly.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you, Simon.
Cheers then. Thank you. On October the 13th, it will have been 100 days of this new Labour government swept into power with a huge majority at the expense of the Conservatives. So what do we all reckon then? Dan, tell us what you think.
Well, I think on the one hand, you couldn't really expect any new government to completely turn around, decades of economic stagnation in the country in 100 days. It'd be unreasonable to expect that. But there's a widespread perception it hasn't gone very well for the Labour Party because they've been racked by scandals about, office politics in Number 10 and freebies and donations and all that kind of thing, which is no doubt very bad, but that's also stuff that's been endemic to British political culture for decades and decades. And also not to mention Labour Party / the left in general hasn't really been in national government in 14 years. And in that time, the sort of national media and political atmosphere has gotten a bit more hysterical, some would say. So I think it's only natural that the first 100 days would just be a flurry of every single mistake looking like the end of the world to them. But I don't think anyone could say it's gone well for them. But to act like they could have single-handedly reversed decades of structural problems in 3 and a bit months in government, I think would be unreasonable.
It is unreasonable. People's expectations are not necessarily that they want to see things done. They want to hear what is going to be done. And I think that's part of the general reflections that people had when I was down in Folkestone last week. But I guess, most governments get about a year normally before things begin to get really examined carefully. But this is like a matter of weeks. It's quite amazing, really.
It depends what you mean by examine carefully. The election was on extremely low turnout. If you combine the turnout figures with the amount of people who actually voted for the Labour Party, it amounts to something like 1 in 5 eligible adults in this country actively voted for the Labour Party. People don't pay attention to politics, and they don't pay attention to politics because for years and years politicians haven't paid attention to them. So I think it's not surprising that you go wandering around folks and then people say they can't tell any difference because that's been the case for a long time now.
I definitely agree that in terms of it's unrealistic to assume that, in the first 100 days, Labour are going to, boost productivity by, 1 million points and all this sort of thing, get GDP skyrocketing or anything like that. But I think there has been sort of a squandered opportunity, I do think, in terms of as you were saying, people in Folkestone saying they were promised this change, and they were, although they can't deliver, an immediate change of fortunes for the country straight away, there is a lot of politics is down to sort of perception, and even just sort of talking about change differently, sounding a bit more positive. A lot of people, I think, would feel a lot better. However, I feel that the Labour Party, and particularly Keir Starmer, I mean, you could say it's expectation management, and he's not trying to sort of pull the wool over people's eyes and say, oh, it's going to all be amazing. But equally, people do like a little bit of hope, and they do want to hear some good news, and they do want to feel that, and I think that switch over from a Conservative government for 14 years to a Labour government, it might be entirely perception-based, but people wanted to feel a real change, even if it's just quite insubstantial.
Yeah, there's one or two of us in the newsroom who are old enough to remember 1997 and the general feeling of optimism that followed. I didn't get that sense with Keir Starmer. It was just getting rid of the Tories.
Yeah, it's not the party atmosphere that there was. I too remember 97. I regret to say, but yeah, it hasn't been that incoming joy that everybody felt beforehand. Also, I agree. Also, 100 days I think is too soon. I think Labour may have given themselves a bit of a difficult task. I mean, when there was the protests and they acted really swiftly to get people before the courts, it was suddenly, wow, that they really can do something, and they're doing it quickly, they're delivering. But they're not going to be able to do that on everything, and I think people's expectations have maybe raised because you're now going to have other backlogs through the courts, and people saying, well, why is my case taking 3 years to come to court when you were able to get somebody in prison, within the space of 3 days previously?
I don't think Keir Starmer ever sort of saw himself as a Tony Blair character, sort of coming in on the sunny uplands of a new era or whatever. He was trying to cast himself as a serious man to sort really terrible problems out, and he did act very swiftly with the riots and the attacks on asylum seekers' hotels, and that certainly probably raised people's expectations that other things would be done very quickly as well.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's not going to happen. I mean, we all know that these things take time, and there's going to be a lot of red tape ahead of them, and a lot of things that they need to undo and unpick before they actually forge forward and do something positive. That will take time. Let's perhaps have another look in another 100 days and see how they're doing.
I think their first actual concrete material test outside of the law and order response to the sort of unrest over the summer will be the budget or financial event or whatever they call it these days. It's been delayed by a couple of weeks by Rachel Reeves, and that will be a test to see if they're because there's some stuff in there that we'll probably expect, like planning reform, but the Tories are going hard on them, saying they're probably going to put through stealth taxes or something. It'll be a good test to see whether they offer anything sort of more long-term and substantial, or whether it's a return to bean counting, deficit reduction obsessed Treasury orthodoxy. But given that Rachel Reeves worked for the Bank of England for quite a long time, I wouldn't expect much exciting in that one. Do
you think that the fact that there was a long delay between July the 4th and the end of October, that actually a lot of government departments aren't able to actually announce officially what they're going to do because they're not quite sure exactly how much money they are or not going to get or not going to get? And that's left a bit of a void where the media and social commentators and political commentators are actually able to sort of fill that vacuum.
Yeah, the government departments can't really commit to any substantive policy agenda which isn't already costed and already budgeted and or cost free for that matter. So any journalist who's tried to find something out from a government department on, say, the environment or education in the last few months had a right pain of it, because they basically can't tell you anything that wasn't already the case under the previous government. Whereas after October, we might, or after the end of October, we might actually hear about something substantive. Once again, whether they're willing to spend the money required to change anything about any department of government remains to be seen. Do you think they've blown that opportunity already? No, not really. I mean, if they commit to spending and reform, which will actually make a difference to education and local government and every other sort of creaking area of the British state which needs reform, then it might make a difference. It's just question is whether they're willing to commit to doing that or have the political will to do it, which remains to be seen.
OK, folks, that's your lot this week. Thanks to Nikki, Rob and Dan, and to our special guest, Stanley Forecast. Don't forget to keep an eye on KentOnline/politics for the latest news from across the county. And you can also sign up to our newly launched Politics Briefing newsletter by visiting kentonline.co.uk/newsletters/. And finally, don't miss KMTV's Politics Show every Friday at 5 p.m. All the best.
Thanks for listening to the Kent Politics Podcast. Don't forget to check out stories throughout the week on the politics page of Kent Online. And you can watch the Kent Politics Show with Rob Bailey on KMTV every Friday at 5 p.m. or on demand at kmtv.co.uk.
This has been an I Am Listening original podcast. For more information, head over to our website, im-listening.co.uk.